trying.
Well, let's see how you do tonight.
Yeah, and I know, and you're here, and I make sure you have it in. It would probably be much easier also for me to know that you got it.
Okay, everyone, we're going to get started because Randy has a lot to say today. So this is Randi Beiderman. She is the co-author of Schindler's Listed, and she's going to share this, I'm telling you, the most fascinating story, extraordinary story of family secrets and the journey to Poland and back. It's an amazing, amazing story. I got to listen to her tell the story on Friday, and I can't wait to hear it again, because it's amazing. You will really enjoy it. So welcome, Randi.
If you remember it well enough, why don't you do
No,
that?
I don't think I remember it well enough.
Okay, now can I remove this?
You can.
Okay. Yeah, because sometimes I like to move about a bit. Wonderful, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the nice introduction. And this is my second visit here at Heritage Point. I was here probably about 2 to 3 years ago, and hey, I guess I must have done okay because they let me come back. So anyway,
Same book.
there it is, same book, yeah. I'm not that prolific, I don't have a new book out yet, but there it is, here it is, and each of you at your chairs should have a copy. So you got to go back to your room after and read it, and there's going to be a test. Okay, so anyway, this is what got me invited, and my story is, obviously it's a Holocaust story, it's Schindler's Listed, and we'll get to how the title came about, but
Could you speak just a little louder?
okay, how's that? Okay,
Thank you.
alrighty. Thank God they gave me a microphone. Yes, when I spoke on Friday, it was at a Chabad shul, and it was after Shabbos, so they wouldn't give me a microphone, so I had to scream. I don't think I can scream today. I'm screamed out. So anyway, folks, thank you for attending. It's always a pleasure, an honor, and I always enjoy having an audience to share my story with. So anyway, primarily this is the story of my late husband's parents, particularly his dad, who is at the crux of the story. So anyway, both of my in-laws were Polish Holocaust survivors. They survived the war, they spent some time in a displaced persons camp in Linz, Austria, and then they made their way to the United States and ultimately to Detroit, where my husband was born. And my husband grew up in my husband grew up in Oak Park, which is a predominantly Jewish suburb of Detroit.
We're from there.
Oh, you're from Oak Park?
Yes.
Oh, Landsman.
My husband had the bowling alley.
Really? Okay. Probably would have known my father-in-law. So anyway, moving along with that. So Mark knew right away that something was a little bit different about his family. There's his parents. Lovely people. In Poland, they were known as Harry and Salomea. Come to America and they become Harry and Sally. So there's my Harry and Sally, and established a home in Oak Park. Mark was born. He knew something was different. Both of his parents had accents. Almost nobody in the Oak Park neighborhood had accents. So his parents were accented. The other thing he noticed that kind of caught him was he'd go to neighbors' birthday parties, and all the kids would have aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents, and Mark had none of those. And he'd be like, even as a 6-year-old, he thought, wow, this is different. Why don't I have any of these people? So he'd come home from the birthday parties, he'd say, Mom, Dad, why do I not have uncles and aunts and grandparents? And his parents were like, oh, they were all killed during the war. And they left it at that. They were killed. And if he tried to ask more questions, they would always just, deflect and evade and say, we'll talk about it when you're older. That was always the buzzword, we'll talk about it when you're older. Unfortunately, this picture was taken during Mark's bar mitzvah in 1974. Less than 6 years later, Harry was dead. He got pancreatic cancer and died very quickly, very young. So that whole promise of we will talk about it when you're older never came to fruition because Mark was never, in his dad's opinion, old enough to hear this. But there was one thing that his dad did share with him, just kind of off the cuff. And it's tied to this coin. All of you are old enough to recognize this, right? Okay, Mercury had dime that went out of production in 1945. You're going to say, how does that relate to a Holocaust story? It does. Let me get there. So what happened back in the day, Mark was about 9 years old. He went shopping with his mother to the grocery store, went through the checkout, she paid with cash, she got some coins back, and Mark had been a good little boy, so she gave him a handful of coins for being a good kid in the grocery store. And he's looking, and he's like, oh wow, Mom, look at this. I got a Mercury head dime. I'm gonna start a coin collection. I can hardly wait. Gotta get home and start a coin collection. So he runs in the door and he's all excited. He shows his dad. He says, Dad, look, what have I got here? And Dad looks and says, oh yeah, got a little coin. Yeah, okay. And Mark's like, yeah, I want to do a coin collection. What do you know about coin collecting? And just the enthusiasm of his young son just sort of triggered something for Harry, who never talked about anything, to say, oh, my family had a coin collection in Europe. We buried it in the yard just before we were deported by the Nazis. And that was it. That was as much as he'd ever said about these coins. But that was all it took. Just in the recesses of Mark's young mind, this just kind of stayed with him, and he remembered it through decades. And then time went on, and Mark's dad was dead and gone. No chance to talk to him again, and he was off. He went to Michigan State, got his undergrad degree in animal science, and then he went off, remained at Michigan State, and got a veterinary degree. And when he was about 2 years along in his veterinary degree, and his mom called him and said, look, I don't want to stay living in the house anymore. I want to get a smaller condo. I don't want the responsibility of. She said, he said, yeah, you're right, you don't need this. So he said, I'm gonna come and help you move. So he shows up with boxes one weekend, and he goes to his dad's nightstand, and he starts opening the drawers, and he's finding these pictures. Really old, pictures of a lady and some children. And he looks at his mom and he says, why does Dad have these? Who are these people? And his mom says, oh, this is your dad holding the ball. That's one of his sisters. And there's a picture of all three of his sisters together. And Mark just shook his head and said, Dad had sisters? It was such a revelation to him that his dad had sisters. There was so little discussion about family life that he did not know his dad had sisters. Can you imagine not knowing that you had aunts? That was Mark's life. Everything was covered up, hidden, not talked about. So at this point, Mark sits his mom down and says, okay, this is enough. You've been waiting for years to tell me I'm old enough. I'm in veterinary school, I'm an adult, I'm 22 years old. Talk to me. And his mom sat down and started telling him pretty much about her life and how she lived, and she was from Krakow, and she went through the Plaszow camps, and she ended up in Auschwitz, and then deported to Bergen-Belsen, and then back to Theresienstadt, where she was liberated. So she came forth and told him just about everything, but not completely everything. And then she said, and then Mark said, okay, got your story down pretty good. Talk to me about Dad and Dad's family. She said, you know, I don't really know that much. And Mark was like, but geez, you know, you were married to him for 30 years. What'd you talk about? TV shows? You know, like, what'd you talk? And she said, we didn't talk about that. That was the past. You know, our goal was bury the past, move on. So he said, well, what were the girls' names? She says, I don't know. What happened to them? They were killed during the war. How? I don't know. Do you know their ages, birthdays, any? She says, I don't really know anything. But one thing I can tell you, I got something for you. Your dad was from Krosno, Poland. There we go. We have a name. We have Hersch Beiderman, Krosno, Poland. So Mark jumps into action, says, okay, I'm going to start a quest. I'm going to find out everything about these girls. I'm going to find out about their lives, their past, how they died. And I think I'm also going to find these coins. Gotta find these coins. That's the cool part of the story. So he starts with a letter writing campaign. Of course, he does not speak Polish, so he presses his mom into service, which she's really unhappy about, and has her write out letters in Polish, which he dutifully mails off to the Krosno City Hall, Krosno Vital Records Office, anywhere that he could think of that might have information. And anyway, here's the map of Poland. Let's see. Trying to get my, oh, no, that's not what we want. Yeah, here we go. Okay, right here, this is Krosno, right in the far southeast corner. This is where Mark's mom was from. There's Krakow, there's Krosno. So they grew up, even though they didn't know each other before or during the war, they grew up not so far away. And so he starts writing letters, having her write them, sends them off. And this is about 1984, and he never gets any responses. But what's going on in Poland in 1984? It's under the Soviet Union. The Iron Curtain is firmly in place. There was not a free flow of information between the United States and any Iron Curtain country. So it wasn't terribly surprising that he wasn't getting any information. So time went on. He went off to school to Colorado State to get a advanced degree in equine surgery. And he just got busy with life and tried to do things here and there and never really had any success in finding anything. And then what happens? A few years later, I meet him. And he tells me the story about his family and his coins. And I said, okay, so what have you done? And he said, well, I've written some letters and I made some inquiries at the Polish consulate, but, you know, nothing's really been very helpful. Even the Red Cross wasn't helpful. So I said to him, in my youthful naivety, I said, hey, have you been to Poland? And he said, no, I haven't, and I really have some trepidation about going to Poland. And at this point, travel to Poland was possible. I mean, the Iron Curtain fell in 1991. So, I mean, by the time he and I met in the mid-1990s, you could realistically travel here. It wasn't easy, but it was doable. And I said, hey, we gotta go. Because it's one thing to write letters and be ignored. It's a whole other thing to show up at the city hall and say, okay, here I am. I want the records on my family. And I said, let's go. Let's do this. And in spite of his initial reluctance, finally he did say, okay, all right, let's go to Poland. So we did. We, and it was so early on in traveling to the Iron Curtain countries that realistically we couldn't even directly fly from Detroit into Poland. We had to We had to fly from Detroit to Frankfurt, pick up a rental car, and then drive through Europe and head to Poland, which was actually fun, you know, road trip in Poland. What could be more fun? Road trip to Poland, rather. So we landed in Frankfurt, head south, went into Bavaria, drove across Austria, which, here's the picture. Here's Mark and I in Salzburg. And I love this picture because I always say that it was on this trip, it was the last time we smiled. Salzburg was great. It was beautiful. We were having fun. The next day we crossed the border into Poland, and here we are. Welcome to Poland. There's the gates to Auschwitz II, otherwise known as Birkenau. And from talking to Mark's mother, we already knew that the family had a history here. His mother's spent some time in this ghastly place. So pulling up to this, you know, you see the pictures and you know it's horrible, but you actually pull up to it and feel the air around it, and it is a gut punch. And it just devastated us both. And it was like, wow, what a horrible thing to pull into. But there it was. So, we toured Auschwitz, went on to Krakow, spent the night there, and then we were planning to go to Krosno the next day. So, after the drive through Poland with the bad roads and lack of signage and how upset we were after Auschwitz, we just decided, hey, I don't think I want to drive to Krosno. I mean, we weren't even sure we were going to find our way there because Krosno was a really small village. So we hired a driver named Mishko, Polish guy, fluent in Polish obviously, and spoke pretty decent English. So he picked us up the next morning and drove us into Krosno. Mark's telling him the story the whole way of the family. He's like, wow, interesting story, cool, you know. And then we get there, it's like, okay, Mishko, where should we start? And he says, hey, I'll take you to City Hall. Took us to City Hall and just dropped us there and stayed with the car, and we went in. And I remember thinking, why are they coming with us? You know, I mean, he's our guide, we paid him for the day. He's fluent in Polish, he could really facilitate things here, but he stayed with the car. And then I kind of found out why. We go up to the kiosk, and Mark, in his halting, almost non-existent Polish, is trying to talk to the clerk there to say, I'd like some records on my family, and she's looking at him, shaking her head. And then, no records, everything lost, gone. And she pulled down the barricade that said closed, Polish. And I'm like, oh, we're not doing well with these folks. So then we actually tried some other things in other places and met with the same thing over and over again. Grim faces, downturned, and head shaking no. And I'm like, wow, we're not doing well here. And I felt really bad because this had been my idea. Hey, let's go to Krosno. So I was feeling pretty terrible. And we get back to the car and I'm like, Mishko, how come you're not coming in with us to help us translate and stuff? And he's like, oh. He says, I don't want to be in the middle of this. He says, you got to understand, we're just coming out from Soviet domination. We're just starting to become a country of our own. And he said, we don't get many tourists, and pretty much the only people we see are Jews, tracing their family roots, and we're all very worried that they're just here to try to reclaim their family property. I'm like, okay, so that's what's going on here. So I'm like, okay, we're not going to do well here, are we? He said, probably not. Okay, so we head back to Krakow, and it was a pretty quiet. On the way there, it was all, you know, talkative and telling and explaining about the family. On the way back, it was really quiet. Because the whole point of us coming there was to do this, and we accomplished nothing. So it wasn't quite what we'd hoped, but it is what it is. So we did a bit more traveling in the rest of Poland, then we cracked back into Germany, head back to Frankfurt and flew home. And we get back home and it's like, okay, where do we go from here with this? And then, I don't know, it was just, he get busy with his career, I'm busy with my career. I taught high school, he was doing equine surgery. And we didn't really talk about, hey, where are we gonna go from here and what are we gonna do? But then, something happened that changed everything. It was one of what I call the serendipitous events. And the thing that happened was, one of Mark's clients, who was also a World War II history buff, was watching a documentary on TV on the making of Schindler's List, the movie. And they were talking about how difficult it was to get places to film the movie in Central Europe that didn't have antennae, whatever, that they could just, you know, rework and make it look like 1940s Europe. And then, as they're going through talking about this, the camera panned across the list, and it showed the first page of Schindler's List. And what did it show? The name Harris Beiderman. And Mark's client looked at that and said, "She's Beiderman. That's my vet's name. And I know his parents were Holocaust survivors. I wonder if his dad was on Schindler's List." So he called Mark up and he said, "Mark, you know, any chance your dad was on Schindler's List?" Mark said, "Well, I don't know. He never said, but he never said anything about anything, really. So I don't know." And this was probably about 1996. We had the internet by then. That was the other thing that really changed everything with research, is access to the internet. Kids have it so lucky today. We had none of that. We used to have to go through microfilm and files and research and had the internet. So what does Mark do with this new information of, hey, there's somebody named Beiderman on Schindler's List? There we go, there's the list. And I know you can't really see it that well from where you're at, but here is the first page of Schindler's List. Number 3 on the list, Beiderman, Hirsch, 7/9/1925, Mark's dad's birth date. Mark's like, whoa, my dad was on Schindler's List. Oh, that is so cool. And I mean, this was huge for a number of reasons. If he'd have been, you know, this 1,200 people on the list, 10 pages that look just like that. And this guy just happened to be watching this show, which just happened to pan across the first page, where his dad just happened to be right at the top. And there it was, Beiderman, Hirsch. So it was a big deal. So immediately, of course, Mark gets online and goes to all these listservs that are handling chat sites for Schindler's List survivors. It's 1996, a lot of these folks are still alive, and they want to connect with people. So what do? They go online. And so Mark posts a question. He said, did anybody know Hirsch Beiderman from Krosno, who was on Schindler's List? Excuse me. And within days, he got a response from somebody that lived in Phoenix named Alex. And Alex writes to Mark and says, yeah, Hirsch Beiderman was my bunkmate in Schindler's factory. Mark's like, wow, great, you can tell me things. And he said, he called him then, once they made the contact through email, he said, give me a call. So Mark calls him, he says, okay, what can you tell me about my dad? And he's like, well, the one thing I want to ask you first is, you were saying Hirsch Beiderman from Krosno. The Hirsch Beiderman I knew was from Lodz. And Mark's like, wait a minute, could there have been 2 Hirsch Beidermans? I mean, is that a possibility? And he said, well, I don't know. I mean, that's your dad's birthday, yeah. But I mean, I'm going to tell you unequivocally, the Hirsch Beiderman I knew was from Lodz. So he said, do you have a picture of your dad from the early days? What's your earliest picture of your dad? Mark said, well, I've got one, I'll send it to you. So Mark sends his picture. It goes to Alex in Phoenix, and Alex calls him back and says, Mark, that was my roommate. Your dad was from Lodge. And I know this because we used to sit up at night and talk about our families, our homes, you know, where we lived, what our lives were like. He's from Lodge. And that was huge. Serendipitous event number 2. We find out not only he was on Schindler's List, but he was from Lodge. And that's a big deal because Lodz is the 3rd largest city in Poland. So a lot of survivors from Lodz, a lot more opportunity to maybe find some people who knew him. And in fact, okay, here's Lodz. Lodz is right in the center of Poland. It's nowhere near Krosno. So we actually spent a number of years trying to figure out why was he telling everybody he was from here when he was from here. We never got the answer to that. Kind of one of those things that gets lost in history. But anyway, it was a big deal for us to know that he was from Lodz because there had been a huge Lodz ghetto. There were a significant number of Polish survivors that came out of Lodz that ended up in the United States. In fact, there were so many Ludzers that made it that they established a quarterly newsletter called The Ludger. That was a big deal. So there was a newsletter, there's people. So Mark goes to his mom and says, Mom, guess what? Dad was from Lodz. And she said, no, he wasn't. The one thing I knew about him is he was from Krosno. He was not from Lodz. So she was adamant that he was from Krosno. We had to work around that for a while. But anyway, so Mark says, look, why don't you just humor me and ask around in the community, see if anybody that you know from the Holocaust survivor community from Lodz knew Dad. And she said, yeah, I'll ask, but I don't know why. And of course, around Detroit, she'd ask here and there, and everybody'd say, well, no, but what are you asking? He was from Krosno. I think, what are we doing this for? And then in March of 2001, Sally decided to go to Florida for a month. She was gone the whole month of March, just had to get away from Detroit winters, which nobody here knows anything about,
Yes,
right?
we do. Yes, we do.
You know. Okay, so here's Sally, and she was she didn't get her own place. She just stayed among friends in, you know, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, and Boca Raton. And one afternoon she went to lunch at a deli, and she got her tray, and she's got her pastrami, and she turns the corner to go find a seat, and she sees an older gentleman reading a Ludger newsletter. She's like, oh, go sit with him. So she goes over and she said, oh, you know, can I sit? And she said, yeah, sit. She's talking to him about the newsletter. She said, so you're from Lodz? He says, yeah, that's where I was from. And she said, you know, my son's got this idea that his dad was from Lodz, but I don't really think so. Any chance you knew Herr Beiderman? And he looked up from his newsletter and he said, yeah, I know him. He was my next door neighbor. Serendipitous event number 3. We had the next door neighbor. So his name was Izzy Olivac. Izzy takes a piece of paper, writes down his name and his phone number, and he's living in Boca. Gives it to Sally and says, when you get back to Detroit, give this to your son, tell him to give you a call. What did Mark do? Almost immediately get her home from the airport. Okay, so he calls him up and he's like, Izzy, my mom just told me you knew my dad. He said, yeah, I knew your dad. Lived next door. We lived at 9 Zaglarska. The Biedermans lived at 7 Zaglarska Street. And Mark was like, wow, okay, I've got a place. And you would think, Mark's on the phone with this guy. Get the information, ask about the girls. It was a next door neighbor. Did he do that? No. No. You finally got somebody. You've been waiting for years. You got somebody. What does he do? He starts planning a trip. You know, and I get home from work and he said, guess where we're going? We're going to Poland. I'm like, oh. And I didn't express it enough, but you'll see in the book, I did not have a good time in Poland the first time. but you gotta read the book. It's more to it than. So I didn't have a good time. I wasn't excited to go back to Poland. In fact, I was devastated about going back to Poland. And I agreed to go back to Poland because Mark wanted to see where his dad grew up. And it was, so we start planning the trip, and off we go to lovely Lodz, Poland. And Lodz is pretty unpleasant. It's a big city in Poland, but it's grimy, it's industrial, it's dark, it's grim. I wasn't looking forward to going there, and it wasn't fun, let's put it that way. But, you know, we were on a mission now, we had an address. So we find the street, and we're like, okay, what are we gonna find? And I mean, you never know. This was like 60 years down the pike. There'd been a war, there'd been the Soviet takeover, there'd been the Glasnost reopening to the west, there possibly could have been urban renewal. We had no idea what we were gonna find. And that's what we found. The house was still standing. And that was a huge deal, because it may not have been. It could have been a parking lot. It could have been an office building. But take a look. I mean, here we are. Here's 7 Zaglarska Street. And it looks pretty rough. I know you're going to look at that and say to yourself, gee, they had a pretty divey house. But, you know, I imagine in 1939 it looked a lot nicer. So there's number 7. There's number 9 where the Olivets lived. And look at this place. Looks pretty untouched from 1939, doesn't it? So we figured, hey, we're good here. Maybe we'll dig up the backyard while we're there. Here's the yard. And so we were looking at this place and looking at the yard and thinking to ourselves, what do we do from here? And we didn't get really well received in Lodz either. So we didn't think we should go knock at the door and ask if we could dig up the yard. And we had nothing to go on anyway, and so we thought, okay, this is reconnaissance. We know it exists, we know where it's at, it looks relatively untouched. Let's roll with this. So Mark starts thinking, okay, we gotta put a plan together. How are we going to determine if the coins are there or where they are? And we had no idea. I mean, we were thinking about like a metal detector or something like that, but a metal detector only goes down a few inches. And we knew that if the coins were still here, they had to be deeper than a metal detector could discover. So one evening, Mark's sitting there watching documentaries on World War II, which he always did. And he sees a story about an Israeli journalist named Yaron Spory, who was kind of making his name locating treasures that the Nazis had plundered. And many of the treasures that they plundered were buried. And they'd say, the interviewer asked Yaron, said, hey, how do you find these buried things? Ground penetrating radar. Big deal. So Mark wakes me up and says, we gotta get a ground penetrating radar. And I'm like, I don't even know what that is. So, he starts looking into things, and we both had family in Israel, so he said, I gotta find this Yaron Spory guy. So he called one of his cousins and said, can you find this guy for me? And within days, Yaron Spory's calling up Mark saying, yeah, I hear you want to talk to me. Mark's like, yeah, let me tell you my story. He says, oh, really? It's interesting, it's amazing. So I'm gonna be in New York in August. Why don't you come and meet me? Because I have a friend at Fox News. We'll pitch it to Fox News. There's this guy named Pierre Kafka, who's the head of the news bureau in New York. Why don't we pitch it to him and see if we can pull Fox News in and use some of their resources? Mark's like, great. So we go to New York, and I'm like, wow, this great adventure. Here we are in New York. We're going into the Fox News building. I'm like, ooh, this is great. And there we are. We're meeting with Yaron. Yaron's like, yeah, come on, good, this is great, let's get another thing going here. And Pierre's looking at Mark, and he's like, you know, this sounds like a lot of Bubba Massa to me. We know Bubba Massa? That's what Pierre said, it's all Bubba Massa. He said, every Holocaust survivor kid thinks his parents left gold buried in the backyard. He said, go home, kiddo, live your life, shut up, it ain't gonna happen. So, another one of those times when we had all great hopes and plans, and, you know, it kind of got dashed. So, take the elevator down. We're walking out down into the street in New York, and I think Yaron took the next elevator down. He's chasing us down the street. He's like, hey, don't worry about this. Don't, you know, I got other plans. We're gonna find this. We're gonna figure it out. I'm like, okay, well, let's see what we can do. And so it kind of got iced for a while, and Yaron would call Mark from time to time with some harebrained scheme about buying the property and excavating the yard, and all of it just seemed crazy. So I'm like, geez, Mark, give it up. You know, I think the guy's, he's a schnorrer, you know. And so life went on. He's still doing his veterinary thing. I'm doing my high school thing. And I get a call at work, and he has me paged down to the office, which they never do when you're teaching. You never get paged to the office unless somebody died. So I get paged, and I'm like, oh God, oh God. And I get down there, and I pick up the phone, it's Mark, and I said, what is going on? And he said, I just got a call from Yaron Soiree. He and the Fox News crew are at 7 Zaglarski in Lodge, and they've just dug up the coins.
Oh, no.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And at least Yaron called him, but he should have called him in advance. Do we think that? Yeah, it would have been nice if he would have said, hey Mark, I'm here with the Fox News crew, why don't you fly over? We're thinking about getting permission to dig up the yard. He didn't do that, he waited till the yard was dug up. Yaron's excuse for this was that he and the Fox News crew were just in Lodge for the commemoration of the 60-year anniversary of the liberation of the Lodge ghetto, and they just happened to meet some of the local dignitaries and said, hey, you know, you're on city council here, what do you think? What do I gotta do to get permission to dig up a yard? And they were almost kind of laughing at him, like, oh yeah, you wanna go dig up a yard. And so they were given permission. And in spite of them saying, hey, we were just doing this as an aside, they actually had ground penetrating radar machines with them. Yeah, so they were ground penetrating radar. They had 4 sites that they dug that they got false alarms. The 5th site, they dug them up. And there's the newspaper articles. Son finds Holocaust survivor treasure. Dozens of gold coins were buried in Poland. They were actually 63 gold and silver coins from the 17 and 1800s. And this is a Polish article. And in fact, I just recently, it's all in Polish, and I still have this article at my house, but I never had it translated. And interestingly, one of my new neighbors in Victoria, Ellie, yeah, his relatives here, Ellie, what Ellie had done was, he said, you know, I have this friend in Seattle, so Ellie's friend actually translated this article for me, so I now have the Polish article translated into English. And it's really interesting because it's given me information that I didn't know about before. So, moving on from that, this picture is actually, this is Mark in lunch, looking at the coins. As soon as he got the message that they'd been dug up, he boarded a flight, and he was actually able at this point to fly directly from Detroit to Warsaw. And then he took a train from Warsaw to Lodz, and it was the woman that wrote this article's name was Joanna Podolska. And Joanna arranged to pick Mark up at the train station, and she spent 3 days with him and her news crew and a photography crew and went around town and investigated, took pictures of the house and had pictures of the hole where they dug up the actual coins and pictures of the ceramic pot where the coins were being held. They were 3 feet down in the yard, almost like underneath that tree. I don't know if you remember the picture, but there was under a tree. So there they were. We kind of came full circle. Found the coins. 2004, like 20 years from when Mark first saw the pictures of the girls. And the story continues. You're going to say, did you get to take the coins home? Sadly, no. Because the coins were dug up in a part of Lodge that was owned by the municipal government, they claimed them as property of the municipal government. These coins are now sitting in the Museum of Archaeology and Ethnography in Lodge, Poland. To this day, they are still sitting there. There are currently some efforts going forward to try to move them either to Yad Vashem or some other Holocaust museum, which really is where they should be. But it hasn't happened yet. So anyway, Mark went there thinking maybe he was going to bring these home. No, it was a false alarm. So he didn't get to bring them home, but he ended up developing a really good relationship with Joanna Podolska. And she's, at the end of the visit there, she said to him, look, I feel so bad the way this turned out for you. She said, is there anything I can do maybe to help you? And he said, yeah, you know what, there is. He said, everywhere I've tried to go to try and find out information about the girls, I can't. Do you think you could find some information to let me know that the Beidermans ever actually lived here, that the girls were actually alive at any point? She said, let me work on that. And here comes serendipitous event number 4. 6 weeks later, in the mail, we get these documents. This is Mark's paternal grandparents' marriage certificate and birth certificates for the 3 girls. We have certificates for Sarah, Sipra, and Pesha. Incredibly, after 20 years, the coins have been found. The girls' names have been found. We had birth dates, and that changed everything. And here we are. We got the names. And that actually spearheaded more ability to research because he actually had names to go on. So we were able to actually find out what happened with the girls. And that kind of brings me to the end of my talk. There's an awful lot more, so let me suggest you read the book. And if you ever have any questions, talk to Pam. She can get a hold of me. So at this point, I'd love to open up to questions. Do you have a question?
Okay. Yeah, my question is, I know the Poles very well,
Yes.
and that was a foolish thing to do. You go in the middle of the night and you dig it up and you maybe get it. I
Okay.
know people that found their house and still they're not going, in Poland you don't get anything. If
I
you
know.
go the straight way, you're just wasting your time. Because
Well-
I would be very disappointed. I mean, it's a wonderful story, but I would be very disappointed because, that's how they operate.
I know.
So you
I learned
don't,
that.
you don't
We-
go straight.
We kind of knew that it was going to happen that way, but think about it. How could we, under cover of darkness, dig 3 feet down? Because here was a whole crew. Like they brought a whole ground-penetrating radar crew, and they dug 4 different spots until they get to the 5th one where they actually found it. There was no way that we were going to be able to do this under cover of darkness. It wasn't ideal, but it was really important to find the coins because I know, you're gonna say, well, what difference it made, now the Poles got it, but I mean, they do, but at least we know they exist, and there was something tangible that the Beidermans left behind. I mean, they came out of the camps with nothing. But the coins exist. And it helped get Joanna Podolsky into this, who was able to give us this information and get us the names, so sometimes.
It's worth something, but it's disappointing
Yeah.
because that Poles are worse than Germans when it comes to give anything back.
Interestingly, you're right on that. You're totally right, because part of what we did, give you an aside, and this isn't in the book because this happened afterwards. Part of what we did as we contacted Randall Schoenberg, who was he was the lawyer who got the woman in gold painting back from the Austrians. We figured, hey, you got the woman in gold back from the Austrians. You know, talk to us about this. And he's like, oh. He said, the Austrians are one thing. The Poles are completely different. He says, you're getting nothing from the Poles. So that's how it stands right now. But, I mean, things change. Things change. You never know what's going to happen in life till it's happening. So I do keep working. I reach out constantly to people. I'm connecting, you know, since I've been down here, I've been connecting with the people at the Orange County Holocaust Museum. I'm saying, hey, look it, this is my family. There's coins in Poland. What do you think? Do you have anybody that you think you could just pressure them to say, hey, release these coins, put them in a Holocaust museum? I'm not looking to personally own them. I don't need to have them in my hand, but I need to get them out of Poland because that bothers me terribly. Okay, another question, please? Yes, sir?
Do you have any idea what the value of the coins are?
No. They were very careful not to give us a realistic, honest appraisal. But think about it. They're gold, they're silver, 1800s.
It's really their intrinsic value. It's not the gold and silver.
It's not the gold.
It's the history.
The story, I know, it's huge, isn't it?
It's magnificent.
I know. When I think about this story, I lived it, and I think, wow, I mean, you can't write fiction this good, can you? No, I mean, this is an amazing story. The fact that little snippet that Mark found out about when he was 9 years old, that Mercury had died, and just holding this in his little kitty brain all these years, and you know, and then just the serendipity of, you know, the horseman seeing the name, Sally being in Florida at this moment in time and running into Izzy Olivet and getting the address. I mean, there are so many times that we'd just be stalled in research and something would happen that was like, here's your gift from God. And there was so many times during our research and our lives trying to figure stuff out that I used to look at Mark and say, if you ever question your faith, don't. Don't question your faith.
The most
You have been-
amazing thing was meeting that man in a cafe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah, that was huge. We had an address. I mean, weren't gonna get that from the Poles. And in fact, interestingly, one of the things that I found out, having this article translated, one of the things I found out was that the Polish authorities said that they looked back at the records from the 1930s and nobody named Beiderman ever lived in that house. And I thought, oh yeah, right, you know, yeah. So it's you know, the things we got were gifts from God, really. I don't know how else to say it, and you know, I don't know what everybody's level of religious participation is, but honestly, it really changed everything for me. I could never be agnostic, knowing what we were given. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
Has your husband done DNA testing?
No, he hadn't, and he's gone now, so
Oh.
it ain't gonna happen now.
Oh.
Yeah,
Do you have children?
Yeah, just one.
Okay.
And she's not in the mood.
What was the question?
About DNA testing. Have we done DNA testing? You know, I wish that somebody in the family would, because every so often people come up to me and say, hey, you know, I have this doctor in town, he's Dr. Beiderman, are you related? And all I know is that other than Harry Hausch, as far as I knew, all of the Biedermans were killed
Yeah, I
during
know
the war.
some Jewish people have found family, you know, from the Holocaust that they thought were gone through DNA.
They find them. Yeah,
They have.
should be doing this then,
Yeah.
right? Yes. Okay, thank you for attending, and like I said, please read the book, share it with your families.
Randy, thank you, and everyone, there's a book on every seat, it's a gift from Randy, so please read it, take them, I'll put one in the library also, okay? Thank you again, that was fascinating.
Okay.
Let's give her a hand.
Thank you.
When you write your next one.
Okay. All right. Thanks for attending, everybody.
Well, thank you for coming and sharing.